Sadler behind us. Or Sadler. Oh, and we are on. Good evening, one and all. Welcome to the channel and to the latest live stream. Tonight we've got something a little bit different. It's away from martial arts paradigm, and we're going to be talking about whether BDSM should be included as a mental health condition, and those engaged in BDSM activities should be referred to psychiatric services. Now, I appreciate this sounds pretty hardcore and pretty intense of me actually saying that, but something came up recently. I happened to see a clip from Pulp Fiction. And in this clip of Pulp Fiction, there was two men strapped to chairs with gag balls in their mouths. Well, yeah. And I've never seen Pulp Fiction before. It's one of these films I've heard a lot about, and a lot of people talk about it. It's very sort of like cult classic kind of film, but I'd never seen it myself. But this clip that I happened to see was just like these two guys in a chair, a black guy and a white guy with gag balls in their mouths. And there were two bad people who were going to torture them. And they selected one of the guys. It was a black guy going to get raped, essentially. So they took him into another room, and they woke up this guy called the Gimp. Now, the Gimp, if you haven't seen Pulp Fiction, was this guy. I'm assuming it was a guy. You don't actually see him. He's all like strapped up in this black leather suit. So it could have been a woman, but either way, this thing was called the Gimp. So the Gimp was in a box, and one of the bad guys was like, "Wake up the Gimp," and the other bad guy was like, "But the Gimp's asleep." And the first bad guy then goes, "Yeah, you're just going to have to wake him up then." So they wake up the Gimp, and he comes out and watches the white guy, who's not going to be raped at that moment, as these two people take the black guy into the back room and rape him. It was a hard-hitting scene, I have to be honest, and bearing in mind I've not seen Pulp Fiction before, to suddenly just turn on the TV and just see that in the space of like 5 minutes. It left quite a few questions in my head. Being a psych student myself, I saw there was grounds here for making a video. There was enough material I found to be able to discuss and explore and delve and flush this out. And that being said, not just the fact that I necessarily found the scene somewhat hard-hitting from both an amusing perspective, and I'm not saying it was amusing because this guy was assaulted. I'm just saying that the scene itself, I mean, I can imagine them rehearsing this scene, and they probably had quite a whale of a time kind of like getting ready for it, and how they came up with all the dialogue of like, "Wake up the Gimp," and "the Gimp's asleep," and all this kind of stuff. I mean, how do you even come up with that? This, of course, was directed by Tarantino, who, by all accounts, Tarantino had a foot fetish, allegedly. That's what I've heard. I don't know how much of that is true. I've never met Tarantino. I'm just taking at face value, I suppose, things which I've heard. But I feel Tarantino is one of those directors who is very unique. He's very unorthodox. And if you watch a Tarantino film, you're going to come away feeling something. I'm not necessarily saying that what you're feeling is going to be good, but you're definitely going to feel something. It's not a film you could, especially Pulp Fiction, I don't feel is a film you can just sit down and just watch on, I don't know, you've got a spare few hours to kill, and you're just like, yeah, fine, I'll just put Pulp Fiction on it. I don't feel as though it's one of those kind of films. You have to kind of be into some sort of mood in order to watch it. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Even though we weren't in the mood to watch it, and then that clip came on, I was very disturbed.
Actually, when we happened to see this clip of Pulp Fiction, we weren't really in the mood for it either. But I think we ended up watching The Simpsons or something in the end, or The Chase. We watched The Chase. But point being, I went away, and I remember I was in my car a few days later on, very long journey, and I found myself thinking about things, as you do. Long journeys, you've got a lot of time for yourself, and a lot of things are going through my mind. And this scene, which I'd seen from Pulp Fiction, kept going through my head. So I got thinking about it. I was like, okay, so let's take this and turn it into something constructive. Let's have a discussion about this. Let's explore this whole GIMP paradigm and BDSM lifestyle and BDSM concepts, and let's explore and discuss it, because it's taboo for some reason, especially in the Western Hemisphere, and we like discussing taboo things on this channel. And we have discussed some taboo things on this channel. We have talked about, certainly in live streams, we have talked about politics, we have talked about religion, we've talked about loads of different ideas and topics and subjects which many people may consider to be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about. But I feel, though, the fact that many people find them uncomfortable to talk about is very much why they should be discussed and explored, because it makes you think, it makes you look inside yourself and really analyze whereabouts it is that you may stand on such topics. So talking about the whole BDSM paradigm, and this is a discussion which I've had with Snoop Lioness many times. Sometimes the discussions get a little bit, I wouldn't say heated, but they certainly get quite animated about the whole mental health aspect of BDSM. Now, I have life experience. I have worked most of my adult life with people with mental health and learning difficulties and various different types of sociological and forensic and psychiatric conditions which people have. So I feel as though that I have a lot of experience to draw on from those areas, and to be able to kind of identify certain concepts and paradigms and dogmas. And I appreciate I'm using the word paradigm a lot, but I feel that is quite an accurate encapsulation of patterns which I have seen of working with people, especially with mental health. You do see certain patterns, you do see certain dogmas and train track behaviors of how people with mental health behave in society, and not necessarily just their behaviors, but also how they engage, and also even some core beliefs they may have as well. And it's easy to say, okay, you're just making a blanket statement about people with mental health. I don't mean it like that. But you do need to have some sort of recognized reoccurring patterns in one's behaviors and thoughts and cognitions and beliefs in order for it to be given a diagnosis of mental health. Because you are going to get, say, people with schizophrenia, they're going to have to behave in certain ways for them to be recognized as having schizophrenia. So where does the whole BDSM fit into all this?
It was often said in other families that long ago.
I'm not quite sure what that was. I mean, there's a number of areas where we could start with this, but I need to compose my thoughts first. Now, I genuinely believe if everybody has a little bit of kink inside of them, and I personally don't feel as though that should be anything to be ashamed of. I mean, people may enjoy a little bit of, I don't know, feathers and tickling and the occasional handcuffs and maybe a bit of spanking here and there. That does not necessarily mean that you are in the lifestyle. That just means that that's something that you may occasionally enjoy, or not even occasionally, you may regularly engage in it, but it's so light core or so soft core as to not register on the BDSM register for people who are heavily engaged in the lifestyle. You may go to a BDSM club and say, oh, you know, I just enjoy having somebody every once in a while tell me to do something. And many people who are pretty into hardcore stuff won't even look at that as being part of BDSM. They'll look at it and just be like, that's just normal life. So if you are into like a little bit of the soft stuff, it doesn't mean that you are involved in the lifestyle. That being said, I do believe that everybody does have like a little bit of kinkiness to them to a degree. Whether they're aware of it or not is a different issue. Where does the mental health get into this? From my experience, I've generally seen the more extreme types of BDSM, the people who I'm going to choose my words carefully here, supported, who have those particular fetishes or interests or behaviors in the more extreme ends, I would not say were particularly level-headed. And what I mean by that is that, as an example, I'm going to take as a case study. Let's say there's somebody who likes having their head put into the toilet. And this is something that me and Princess Snoop Lioness have discussed. We always seem to go back to this example of this person having their head put into the toilet. Now, would you say somebody wanting to have their head put down in the toilet is normal behavior? And again, sorry, I am going to start using the word normal. I know I personally don't necessarily like using the word normal, but in this kind of situation, when I say normal, I generally refer to what is socially and morally permissible. And I'm not going to say socially and morally permissible every single time because I'm going to get exhausted. So I'm just going to shorten that to normal or normalized. Take that how you will. But most people would agree that somebody wanting to have their head put into the toilet and flushed or weed on or shat upon, or being somebody, the dom throwing up over somebody whose head's in the toilet, most people would not say that's normal. Most people say, okay, that is quite extreme behavior because somebody wants to be humiliated, somebody wants to be used, somebody wants to be degraded, and somebody wants to be treated like quite literally filth. What does that mean? And where does that come from? Because most, again, normal people have a degree of self-preservation. And most people, if they see that they're being degraded or abused, which essentially this is, they will not like that. And they will do what they can to get out of that situation. The fight or flight comes into play. They'll either turn on their abuser and attack the abuser in self-defense, or they'll try and literally run away from the situation, which is the flight. And fight and flight is self-preservation. It's not, and it's automatic as well. Quite a lot of the time, you can't necessarily choose what you're going to do unless you are in very specific circumstances. Most of the times, you'll flick between fight or flight as an instinct. Your instinct will kick into play and say, in this situation, you have to run away, or in this situation, you can fight. But say you got a normal person and put their head in the toilet and was flushing it and weeing on it and stuff like that, they will either turn around and attack you, or they'll run away. For somebody to sit there and happily have their head in the toilet, or maybe not necessarily happily, but have their head in the toilet to the extent that they're not fighting back against the fact they've got their head in the toilet and you're flushing it and you're pissing and shitting on it. What does that say? It goes to show they're complicit. They're complying with what's going on to them. And many people in the BDSM lifestyle who I've met and supported enjoy it. They want to have their heads put in the toilet. They want to have piss and shit and sick put all over them. Because to them, it's more humiliating and they get off on the humiliation. Urogenia, I believe it is where you get excited by seeing urine and feces. But the fact is, urogenia is, I believe, in the DSM, Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, 5th edition. I believe it's also in the ICD, which is the International Classification of Diseases, 11th version. The point being, this condition is in both of these mental health statistic manuals because it has been recognized by psychiatrists, by doctors, healthcare professionals as being a mental health condition. There's nothing normal about wanting to be pooed on and stuff. So for somebody to enjoy being pooed on and having their head in the toilet would suggest that actually there is something cognitively wrong with that individual. They have a cognitive defect, but it doesn't even just stop at cognitive. It may go into sociological as well. But they may have an environmental upbringing which they have always been humiliated and abused their whole life. So they may feel that actually that's their place in society, is to be humiliated and abused. And they enjoy the more extreme ends of the humiliation and the abuse they want, because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's fulfilling their conditions of worth, their conditions of self-worth, to be abused in such a way. And because that's what they feel as though they deserve. And for somebody to actually feel like that would suggest that they have a very, very low self-esteem, which that can then tie on to saying that actually this person with very low self-esteem, chances are they then would have extreme depression or extreme anxiety, which again, both anxiety and depression are recognized mental health conditions. So it all adds up. And I'm not saying that you may have depression and you enjoy being abused. I'm not saying that you have anxiety, you enjoy being abused, because a lot of people who have depression and anxiety do not like being abused. That's the worst thing they could think of happening to them. But fetishes are the eroticization of the worst thing you can imagine happening to you. But it goes without saying, because if you have depression, and again, this is going to be quite a generalized statement, but this is, bear with me, this is a train of thought. If you have depression, you're going to feel very low about yourself. You're going to feel very low about life. You're going to feel very low about the future. You're going to have a very low opinion of people around you, because you're not going to trust people around you to help you. So you're essentially surrounded and living in this constant, never-ending circle of negativity. Whether that negativity is true or not, or accurate or not, for somebody with depression, it is very real in those moments of their lives when they're going through their depressions. And because they feel so low about stuff, and especially about themselves, they feel as though that all the bad stuff in life that happens to them, they deserve. And what could be more worse than having, say, somebody who's dressed up in a leather suit, bossing you around, putting your head into the toilet and flushing it? For me personally, that would be, if somebody did that to me, I would not enjoy that at all. I'd think that's, what have I done to deserve this? Whereas somebody who thinks very low of themselves doesn't think about that. They would think instead, I deserve this. Not thinking necessarily, what have I done to deserve this? Because there's part of me that actually believes I don't deserve this. They simply just think, I deserve this. Whatever this leather-clad guy does, the Dominator, I don't know, puts their head in the oven, puts their head in a washing machine or whatever, or makes them eat dog chow from a bowl. They submissively accept what is happening to them. Now, for somebody to have such views on themselves and such accepting of that kind of behavior, again, it's not normal. It's abnormal. It's outside of what is morally permissible and what is socially permissible, which again reflects that people engaging in that more extreme forms, there is something wrong. And I very well am aware of how negative this is sounding, and I can understand people probably look at this and think, oh, I have something against people who engage in this kind of lifestyle. You'll be surprised. But it doesn't just stop at somebody putting their head in the toilet. It's other aspects as well. It's group humiliation. People want to be humiliated, or they get off from being humiliated in groups. They get a kick out of, I don't know, being spat upon. And when you think about it, your saliva has so much bacteria and so many germs in your mouth. To actually be spat upon is, you're almost poisoning somebody. with all that bacteria and all that filth in your mouth, and you spit on somebody. Many people would say that's not erotic. Many people do find spit and saliva an erotic turn on. But one thing which I've learned working with or supporting people with BDSM fetishes, a lot of the stuff, despite having this overarching connotation of being erotic and sexual, a lot of it is not. A lot of it is about control. A lot of it is about either people wanting to relinquish that control because they're in positions of always being in control and they're finding it very stressful. And they want to maybe find a break, they want to find a release. So they want to submit that control, they want to park that control that they have for a set period, an agreed period of time with the dominator, and they give up that control as a release, or as to just maybe try and empathize what it's like to be on the other, have the shoe on the other foot. Other occasions, like a lot of people likewise who I have worked with and have supported who are the dominant ones in these types of relationships, ironically, they've actually come from backgrounds of where they've not had control, or that control has somewhat been taken away from them. So they're doing what they're doing now in order to try and get back that control. There's actually a level of narcissism in this as well. Because narcissism, one of the traits of narcissism is that the narcissist has to be in control. And when I was doing my studies of narcissism, and Snoop Lioness just gave me a very, very strange look. But one of the traits of narcissism is control, and narcissists are scared of two main things. One is losing their image, or their victims seeing through the image and seeing the narcissist for who they are and not who they pretend to be. Because narcissism is all about image, it's not about the self. Narcissists have a very fragile sense of self because they live through their image. They don't live through who they really are. The other thing that narcissists are scared of is losing control. So they have to be in control of everything. And if you ever have an engagement with narcissism, God forbid, or with a narcissist rather, you will find they have to be in control of everything. And if that control gets taken away from them, then God help you. So even with the BDSM, when you get like a lot of the dominators wanting this control, that very much is a display of narcissism. Now, I know we've gone from looking at the submissive who likes to be treated like shit to now looking at the dom. But it does take two to tango. And if we can say that the submissive has mental health needs, it's only fair that we actually look at the dominator as well. Because the dominator is not going to be free of flaws or free of fallacies. And even the dominator, it's very much about the image as well. How if you watch BDSM porn, or even go to like a BDSM parlor, the dom puts on this image of them being perfect. You know, that they want to be worshipped, they want to be adored, they want to be made to be a god or a goddess. They are the perfect woman, they're the perfect man. And yet, at the end of the day, if you look through that, look through the leather, you look through the PVC, the get-ups, whatever, they are just a human being. At the end of the day, nothing more, nothing less. And all human beings have positive qualities, and all human beings have negative qualities. And the dom or the dominatrix is no different. They are still a human being at the end of the day. And at the end of a session, when they take everything off, they go back to being a normal human being who has to pay bills, pays rent, mortgage, whatever, goes shopping, buys their groceries, pays their taxes. They're just a human being. But in that moment of the BDSM relationship, when they're dominating the submissive, they can put on this image, they can escape who they are, they can escape that world, the real world, they can escape society to become, I don't know, a Master Raven or a Sky Sugar or something like that, I don't know, or a Jocelyn K. escapism, to become something that they are not, an image, an actor, an actress. Now, that could all be well if it's every once in a while, because at the end of it, we all like dressing up and putting on a front to the world that we are people who are not. And you can quite often see that if you go, say, I don't know, you go on a date with somebody, you just start dating somebody, and you're always going to dress yourself up. You're going to mind your P's and Q's. You're going to take them off to nice places. That, again, is very much image-based. But the difference there is that that's once in a while. Whereas if you're in lifestyle BDSM and you're doing it day in, day out, of where you're dressing up in leathers and dominating people, you're almost on a daily basis putting on this narcissistic mask to pretend to be somebody who you're not. Narcissism, and that is a mental health condition under the DSM-5, cluster B of the personality disorders. Now we can actually get as well, we can again bat the ball back over into the submissive side, which will then be batted straight back into the dom side as well. But let's bat it back into the submissive side, because what we can talk about now is sadomasochism. And sadomasochism, again, is, society would say, is not normal. Sadism, I'm sure it needs no real explanation, but for the sake of this live stream, sadism is the enjoyment of inflicting pain and discomfort and distress on somebody. Masochism is the enjoyment of receiving said pain, distress, or humiliation. Most people have elements of both inside them at some points in their life. I've, again, bringing martial arts into this, I have enjoyed beating people up. And that's not a conscious thing that I do. I don't go into sparring. I've never been into sparring competitions before where I've said to myself, I'm going to beat this person up and I'm going to enjoy myself doing it. But when you are sparring, especially competition, and you do kick somebody and you get awarded a point, I feel it's safe and fair to say that I speak for most competition sparrers that you do get a real buzz. And sometimes you do find yourself hitting your partner or your sparring opponent just a little bit harder. Or maybe if the rules are out there saying you're not allowed to use certain techniques. And again, I've done this. I have thrown in a sneaky technique where you're not meant to throw in the sneaky technique. But that's not constant, enduring sadism. That's just me being a bit of a shit, but enjoying being a bit of a shit. The sadism we're talking about is the extreme type of where you can see the actual suffering of somebody in front of you, and you don't feel any empathy towards it, which is psychopathy. Being a psychopath is somebody who does not feel empathy. A psychopath is not necessarily a machete-wielding maniac. Most psychopaths, studies have shown, are CEOs of big businesses because they can hire and fire at will. They don't feel emotionally connected to their employees. They're just thinking about what's in their interests and what's in the interest of getting more money. So if it involves maybe giving somebody a disciplinary, which is going to cause them loads of distress, so be it. That in and of itself, psychopathy, again, is a mental health condition. And that ties into the sadism of the sadomasochistic relationship. When you see, not all sadomasochists, but any of them are. But when you get the sadist in the BDSM relationship, lifestyle BDSM relationship maybe, who really enjoys inflicting that type of pain, that is suggestive of a mental health condition. And then when you get the submissive, who enjoys receiving that pain, that is displaying masochism. Now, again, people can tolerate a fair degree of physical punishment. And that's just how human bodies are made, physiologically, psychologically. We could get into evolution and Darwinism here and say, is resilience something we're born with? Is resilience something that we learn as a social learning theory, or we learn it not necessarily empirically through empiricism, but maybe we learn it through experience? Either way, humans are expected to develop resilience, physical resilience, and that protects us from real basic things. That protects us from the weather. You go outside and it's freezing cold, but you've got this physical resilience to be able to do what you need to do outside without crumbling on the floor and melting away into the drains. Likewise, I don't know, fall over in the street. Sure, you may scuff your elbow on the curb and it may hurt for a little bit, but you're still resilient enough to not let that affect you or affect your daily life. You're still going to get up, dust yourself down, and do what you need to do. If you get really bad, you go to hospitals. But most people come out of hospitals. They go in, they come out once they've been treated. That being said, despite that resilience, many people, or most people, would seek not to experience physical hardship. Most people would avoid physical encounters, physical confrontations, and I feel that's very well justified, because again, most healthy-minded people do not go around looking for fights. Most healthy-minded people would rather use their cheese box and come to a resolution which is mutually beneficial to both parties, as opposed to just go, I'm just going to punch you in the face and have you punch me in the face. Most people would try and avoid fights and confrontations. But for the masochist, they will seek out people to cause them harm. And the question here is, why? Why is that? And the answer to that is something which I just said probably about a minute ago. Most healthy-minded individuals would avoid conflict, at least physical conflict. Conflict can be positive and it can be negative, depending on the context. And we need healthy conflict. Negative conflict is just destructive, almost sadism. Healthy conflict is where, say you're in a business meeting and your business partner makes a suggestion, and you know that suggestion they've made is going to bankrupt the company, so you challenge it. But you challenge their suggestion in a healthy way. You don't take them outside and beat them up. You put your point across, hopefully backed up with evidence, to say why you think your idea is going to actually save the company. Now, that may cause conflict because your other partner may not necessarily see it at that time. So you will have that conflict in the discourse between yourself and your partner. But you're doing that conflict for a good outcome. You want something good to come out of it. The masochistic type of conflict is not that. Many people who I've supported before who are masochists, they want to basically have themselves destroyed. Physically, psychologically, emotionally, they want to be destroyed. And they're not interested about making some mutually beneficial resolution where they could say, oh yeah, but I'm doing this for the benefit of myself. A lot of them just want to be treated like shit because they feel, as we said earlier, they feel as though they deserve to be treated like shit. They enjoy being treated like shit. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters to them. As long as I am treated like shit, then something good is happening. Not good to me, but something good, full stop. Whether that's good for society, good for the dominator, that is their focus. But point being again, masochism is not a healthy frame of mind. Otherwise, if the vast majority of the world's population will be masochists, we'd all be going around wanting our heads put into toilets, having people put collars and leashes around us and making us lick our boots as we're being filmed and ridiculed in front of giant, fat Japanese men. The vast majority of the world's population don't want that to happen. A small percentage do. So that ties into, where does that fit in the paradigm of psychiatry? And there's a reason why masochism is in the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, 5th edition, DSM-5, and the International Classification of Diseases, 11th version. It is in there for a reason. That's because people who are claiming to be masochists have been assessed by psychiatrists. They've been assessed by doctors and mental health professionals as exhibiting certain traits and behaviors, certain cognitive paradigms, certain empathic responses, a lack of empathy towards themselves, a lack of empathy towards what is considered socially permissible and morally permissible and socially acceptable, a lack of regard for that. And what we said earlier about the sadist part, sadism being a trait of psychopathy, masochism is also a trait of psychopathy, based on that lack of empathy, based on that lack of self-care, lack of awareness of self-care, lack of, I would say, identity, but I feel that identity can go into like a lot more avenues from there. What I'd say is maybe a distorted identity, which comes back to the image, which is when we talked earlier a little bit about narcissism. Narcissism is all based upon an image. It's not about the self, because the sense of self is very fragile, as we explained. So narcissism is all based on image. And I feel as though with my work I've done with masochists and when I've supported masochists, it's very much the same with them. It is this fragile image of themselves they have. They don't necessarily have a sense of themselves, but they're seeing themselves through the eyes of somebody else, quite often the dominator, but also looking at themselves from a lens as though they are not who they are. They are someone else, which is an image. It's a fake. Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Oh. Snoop Lioness agrees. So Snoop Lioness, what do you have to say about BDSM and mental health? What's your take on it? Snoop Lioness is a certified psychologist who's got an honours degree in criminology. She has worked and studied with people's forensic histories. Many of them have various degrees of psychiatric conditions, personality disorders, EUPD, and she's also doing a master's degree in psychology as well. So she's very, very brainy. So what she says, you have to listen to her. She's more brainy than me. So Snoop Lioness is going to talk about, come here, Snoop Lioness. Oh, she's shy.
No, I'm not shy. I'm not shy.
So what's your take? Let's have like a news bulletin. Dun, 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 dun. Good evening. In tonight's news, we're going to hear from psychologist Princess Lioness, Snoop Lioness. I can't even get her name right. And she's going to talk to us about mental health, psychiatry, and BDSM. What do you think? Okay, she's not. What?
Put me on the spot like that.
Oh, I gave you a warm up. I was like, come on, we've got the news. I did the music and everything. And
I wasn't prepared. I had to bring my notes. No, I mean, to be honest, I completely agree with you. But it is to do with mental health, I suppose. The submissive, as well as the dominatrix side of things. It's definitely like a quack. We've all got quacks and stuff, but I think to the extreme, it's unhealthy, and it's and it's something that they're missing in real life, and they're paying somebody to actually make them feel that way that they're not getting, so they're feeling that lack in their real life, so they're kind of like wanting it privately. That makes sense.
Yeah, actually, I feel that you kind of like summarized actually much better than what I could, because you
Really?
Snoop Lion, unless you didn't hear that, Snoop Lion said that people would display behaviors in order to fulfill an unmet need. And one thing which you'd learn from psychology and behaviorism is that one of my favorite quotes in my professional world is, all behaviors are forms of communication. And when people display behaviors, it's either to get something or avoid something. Snoop Lion just said as well that when people get engaged in BDSM relationships, it's because they're trying to fulfill a need which they feel is not being met. We mentioned earlier as well, actually, that a lot of BDSM is not sexual, which is very, very strange, because a lot of people, when they think of BDSM, they do think of sex. You know, they think of like the archetypical like dominatrix with the thigh-high black boots and
And I've got an additional some information.
yes. Oh, Snoop Linus is talking again, so we need to listen to her.
No, it's basically on the other side of the spectrum, like the submissive, like people that wanting to get hurt, like get slapped or do like really hard things. I mean, okay, fair enough. I can see the pleasure side of that in some like degree, not to the highest degree where it's an injury to yourself, and it's degrading. So a lot of that is definitely mental health, because it's something that they feel they're probably carrying a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, a lot of like they don't feel good enough in the world. So that's why they feel like they need to have that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly agree.
So it's kind of like, you know, you're paying somebody to make you feel shitty, and make you feel better in a way that it's unhealthy, because you feel that guilt and you feel that kind of you're insecure and your expectations of yourself is really low. So then it kind of makes them feel better if they get punished. It's like a punishment for something that they feel, but necessarily that what they're feeling is actually, they can, you know, it's a mental health illness or an unresolved trauma, unresolved issues that haven't been resolved or made, you know, been dealt with.
Unresolved trauma, and I feel actually that I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because that is no, seriously, because a lot of people, both the submissive and the dom, when they're involved in a BDSM relationship, their behaviors are coming from a place of deep-rooted trauma, and that could be attachment disorders, which comes to it.
Yeah.
Maybe the submissive didn't have a particular secure attachment, if you want to take concepts from Mary Ainsworth or John Bowlby.
Isn't it? It's self-blaming and stuff.
Yeah.
Self-torture.
Yeah. But they're going back to attachment. They didn't have proper attachment with their primary caregivers when they were young, and they're trying to somehow get now a form of attachment through BDSM. One of the more extreme areas that we haven't talked about actually is the whole infantilism aspect, where may more commonly be known as adult baby, where you get these fully grown adults who want to dress up like babies and be treated like babies. That can be very Freudian, because Freud said that, or I know Freud is generally now in psychology generally being discredited, making it a bit of a comeback for the last few years. But Freud got two things right, and he said you'll find out the true self about people through their subconscious and from their childhood. What happened to them in their childhood may be very traumatic, so they suppress it into their subconscious, but it never goes away. And that suppression then manifests itself when the child becomes an adult. And that's why a lot of adults will then start behaving in certain ways in adulthood, where they're like, I don't understand where these behaviors are coming from. I don't know why I'm suddenly thinking about things which I've never thought about in my life, or I suddenly have this craving to be treated in a certain way. I don't know where it's come from. Freud would say that's always been there, but it's just been in your subconscious. And most often, those behaviors will manifest themselves through transference, through therapy, and interpretation. So transference in therapy is where I could be a client talking to my therapist, and a lot of what I've been feeling on the inside, I'm projecting onto and transferring onto the therapist. That is what we mean by transference. And countertransference is when the therapist does likewise to the client. But infantilism, with the whole baby play, that could be Freudian, because that could actually be the submissive, the client, wanting to act out the trauma they experienced as a child, with or without conscious comprehension of what's going on. And they're manifesting that trauma in their adult life in a childlike context. So in that moment, the submissive, who is otherwise an adult, has regressed back to their childhood, or their very, very young childhood, acting out fantasies with their primary caregiver, which more often than not would be their mother. Now, I feel this is actually very important as well, because that is implying that they had suppressed, repressed fantasies about their mum. That shouldn't be too surprising, because that's one of the things where people get this fantasy about boobs. Why do you think it is? Because when you're a child, you would often breastfeed. And who would you breastfeed off? More often than not, it'll be your mum. But then if you have an adult who wants to have this baby fantasy where they're acting out these repressed traumas, one, there's 3 levels of mental health here. One is regression. They don't want to go forward. People go forward in life. Whether that's business, pioneering, whether it's natural growth, you grow from a young child to a fully grown adult. To regress, and psychologically as well, your brain develops quite naturally developmental, not even developmental psychology, though that does play a part in it, but your brain grows from a small brain that's only capable of containing and maintaining the basics, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very basic levels of the hierarchy of needs, to when you get to adulthood, your brain grows to encompass various other things: theory of mind, the ability to reason, the ability to have debates, maintain beliefs, etc., etc. So for one to regress, whether they want to regress or whether they just regress anyway, that in and of itself is a cause of concern. That's a mental health issue. Certainly if it's the case of somebody wanting to. 2, they want to go back to, they want to regress to childhood to relive and reenact this trauma in a fantasy setting. That is a mental health concern in and of itself. They want to go back to the trauma. Again, why would a healthy-minded individual want to relive trauma? The trauma owns them. And 3, and personally, I find this one most disturbing of the lot. Not only are they regressing, not only are they wanting to relive that trauma, they want to relive that trauma with a primary caregiver, which, as we said earlier, is more often than not their mother, which is incest, which most people would say is, again, morally impermissible. It's evolutionary, it's an abomination, and socially, it's illegal. So when you get somebody who wants to relive the infantilism fantasy in a Bdsm relationship, that should be cause for concern on all the levels which I've just mentioned. And if one did work in a Bdsm parlor and they had a client who came and said, yeah, I want to have these baby fantasies, I would actually have on my parlor, we do not do that. for the reasons which I mentioned. It's like that is, if somebody came in and said that at my BDSM parlor, provided I have a BDSM parlor, I would be looking at referring them to mental health services. And I'm not saying that with any malice towards the individual, but it's like you need clinical and psychiatric help because you clearly have this trauma that has not been addressed, but you need to address it. The fact that they then want to have these fantasies with their primary caregiver, as we mentioned earlier, more often than not is their mother. Some could say it's moral dumbfounding because they're like, oh, exactly why is that bad? And you're like, because that's your mum. That's your own flesh and blood and DNA and genomes. You've got the same chromosomes as this person. Why would you want to have fantasies about them? It doesn't, in my mind, I'm a very open-minded individual, but stuff like that, it's like, that is where the line is drawn. It's like, this should not even be something to entertain. So for me, the whole infantilism one is, I'd say, actually one of the most extreme that you're going to get. And sorry, Snoop Lioness, you're going to say something.
No, I'm just researching it on the internet. I've asked Grok.
Wow.
I can give you a snippet.
Snoop Lioness has just asked Grok about the infantilism fantasy, and she's going to...
About whether BDSM is...
okay.
Like, causes like poor mental health and stuff. Apparently more research is needed, which is strange. It could be a dissertation.
Yeah.
No, it says in summary, BDSM is not relatively or reliably related to poor mental health or unresolved trauma in a negative, pathological sense for the broader community. Many engage in it healthy as part of a diverse sexuality, but for a subset of individuals with trauma backgrounds, it could either aid resolution of post-risk, depending on context, consent, and self-awareness. More research is needed as current studies highlight individual variability and call for kink-aware therapy to migrate harms. If this applies personally, consulting a mental health professional experiencing kink and trauma is advisable. Says also, for those with unresolved trauma, extreme BDSM can play dual roles. On a positive side, it can serve as a form of trauma play or scripting, allowing individuals to reclaim agency, process emotions somatically, and transform painful memories into controlled consensual experiences that foster healing and empowerment. This can be particularly relevant in therapeutic contexts, though it's not a substitute for professional treatment. On the riskier side, intense activities might unconsciously repeat or re-trigger trauma, leading to dissociation, shame, or exacerbating symptoms in anxiety, depression, or PTSD if boundaries are clearly maintained, or if the practice blurs into non-consensual territory. This is more likely in extreme scenarios where power imbalances or physical sensation echo past abuse.
So that's actually quite insightful from both sides of the coin. However,
because it's sexual abuse as well.
Yeah.
This is regarding unresolved trauma, particularly childhood sexual abuse. The data is inconsistent. Some studies find no significant correlation between BDSM participation and trauma history, viewing it a more consensual leisure activity or innate interest. Others report high rates of past abuse among BDSM participants compared to non-practitioners. especially in a sadomasochistic or extreme subsets, where the trauma might normalize certain dynamics or influence fantasies involving force or pain. However, even in these cases, the majority of the BDSM practitioners do not have trauma histories, and correlations do not imply causation. Trauma does not cause BDSM interest for most people.
The point being there to take away is that each case is going to be subjective.
Sorry.
No.
I'll have a look.
No, that's good actually, and thank you for contributing to that actually. Something which was actually brought up there was engaging in BDSM activities could be a healthy way for the trauma victim to engage in their trauma in a controlled environment with safe words, with consent, with agreed ways of what's going to happen in the session. Many people look at BDSM sessions and they think it's purely what the Dom wants. I'm talking about professional BDSM. But professional BDSM, there'll always be an agreement between the Dom and the submissive beforehand. It won't be a case of the submissive just gets thrown into a room, the Dom then just goes absolutely rabid on them. It's going to be a case of the Dom being, okay, let's sit down beforehand with submissive, let's go through what you're into. Let's explore why you're into these. And this is all for safeguarding, is what limits do you have? What triggers do you have? Because the Dom could call the submissive, I don't know, a fucking doormat. And for all they know, they could have been called a doormat by their mum or their dad as they're growing up, and that could actually be extremely triggering for them. So they're going through the checklist beforehand. So when they actually have their professional session, rules and boundaries have already been established and hopefully maintained during the course of the session. So if the submissive is a trauma victim and they're going into a session with these agreed ways of working, that can be a healthy way for them to play their trauma in a controlled environment. That still has a very high element of risk. With risk assessment, you're never going to eliminate risk. There's always going to be a risk somewhere along the lines, and there are too many variables. Something could happen which even the best prepared risk assessment may have tried to prepare for, but has, for whatever reason, failed. Therapists, it's recommended that therapists get, in the UK anyway, get registered with BACP, the British Association of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. And anybody who's registered with BACP, you've done the training, or not even somebody with BACP, any therapist. The work that I do with bereavement clients, I had to have intensive training for, and I'm still doing training from various different bodies because I want to be able to not just maintain my skills and knowledge, I want to be able to grow on them as well. And if therapists are going to work with people with traumas, anxiety, depression, various different mental healths, addictions, they are going to have training. And not only that, they're going to have a sense of awareness of being able to pick up the body language, pick up the vibe, pick up the feeling, pick up the tone of voice. Is it not right or only fair that DOMs have the same? Should then, and this is a serious question I suppose I'm going to ask actually, should there be a professional register of DOMs in each country? I'm going to say the UK just because I'm UK based. But should there be a national register of DOMs, of where DOMs do have to register themselves, they have to undergo certain training, and that's not necessarily training in just in like how to crack a whip, even though that should, I feel, be part of the training, knowing how to use the equipment correctly. Because people I've supported, again, sometimes things go wrong. You try putting on a piece of equipment onto submissive and you accidentally screw it on a bit too tight in a certain sensitive place, or you light a candle and your submissive backs up and their bum goes on the candle, and this embarrassing stuff. So not only should this regulation cover practical training, so the Dom knows how to use the equipment, but it should also be talking about psychological care, psychological first aid for the client, and also aftercare. Because after a session, the client could just burst down into tears if they're from a trauma background, which, as we said, most people who engage in BDSM would have some form of mental health concern. Whether it's, we said about like the feather earlier on, but if it's just like light BDSM, right the way through to the more extreme forms, you're going to be working with people with trauma. You're going to be working with people who have certain kinks which they don't feel able to share with their husbands or wives. And if you want to be a Dom and you don't have this knowledge about mental health, you may be in for a rude awakening. It's not 50 Shades of Grey. And I personally hate 50 Shades of Grey because it glorified the whole BDSM lifestyle to be cute, cuddly, and sexy and classy. It's not. It's really not. Anyway, guys, hope you have enjoyed this live stream about BDSM and its associated intersectionality with mental health. If you'd like more disturbing and dark live streams that we can talk about in the future about various different kinds of things, then please do let me know, because I'll be more than happy to accommodate. I aim to please people. In the meantime, stay safe, train hard, and keep playing Resident Evil 4 with Leon, because it's the best Resident Evil game around. See you all next time. Stay safe. Ciao.